The day my brother walks out of that courtroom thinking he'd won everything, I was the one holding the door open for him. My attorney grabbed my arm in the hallway. "You understand what just happened in there?" she said. Not angry, more like she was genuinely trying to figure out if I was okay. "Yes," I told her. "Completely." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she shook her head and walked away. I watched my brother disappear around the corner with his lawyer. Both of them already on their phones, already celebrating. My mother was crying. Happy tears, she'd say later. My father had his hand on my brother's shoulder. Nobody looked back at me. That was fine. I'd been invisible to them for years. I was just finally making it official. Let me back up. My name is not important. What matters is that I am the eldest of three. I have a younger brother, I'll call him my brother, and a younger sister who stayed out of all of this. Smart woman. Our grandfather built a small business in eastern Ohio. Nothing glamorous. A commercial cleaning company, janitorial contracts with office parks, a few medical buildings, a school district. He started it in the late 80s with a used van and a cousin who didn't last 6 months. By the time I was born, it was running steadily. By the time I was in high school, it had 11 employees and contracts worth around $340,000 a year. My grandfather left it to my father when he died. My father ran it for 4 years and almost destroyed it. Not out of malice. He just wasn't built for it. He was a good man who liked fishing and hated spreadsheets, and he made decisions on instinct when the business needed someone who made decisions on data. By the time I graduated college with a business degree and came home, 2 of the 3 major contracts had lapsed, and the company was carrying $78,000 in unpaid vendor debt. I was 23 years old. My father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me straight. He needed help. He didn't know what to do, and he was afraid of losing what his father built. He wasn't asking me to fix it. He was just telling me the truth, which I respected then and respect now. I fixed it anyway. I spent the next 8 years rebuilding that company from the inside out. I renegotiated the vendor debt down to $51,000 and paid it off in 2 years. I hired a part-time salesperson, landed 4 new contracts in the first 18 months, and brought the annual revenue up to $520,000 by the time I was 30. I managed payroll, handled compliance, dealt with the workers' comp audit that nearly gave me a heart attack at 26, and drove to client sites personally when something went wrong at midnight, because that was what the job required. My salary the first 3 years was $28,000. I was living in my childhood bedroom until I was 27. My brother, during all of this, was finishing a degree in marketing in Pittsburgh, then working for a tech startup, then doing consulting, which as far as I could tell meant sending emails and going to networking events. He came home for holidays. He asked occasionally how the business was going. He never offered to help. I never asked him to. That was the arrangement. Unspoken, but clear. I ran the business, I got the income. Eventually, I get the business. Except nobody wrote that down. My father brought my brother into a conversation I wasn't invited to sometime around my 29th birthday. I only found out about it later. My brother had apparently told my father that he was ready to get involved in the family business, that he'd been doing marketing work and could really help scale it, and that he felt it wasn't fair that I was the only one with an ownership stake. My father, who was not a confrontational man and who loved his son very much, agreed. My mother, who has always believed my brother is more capable than any available evidence suggests, agreed too. 6 weeks later, my father called a family meeting and told me they wanted to bring my brother on as co-owner. 50-50. He'd buy in at a reduced valuation because he was family. They'd already had a number in mind. The number was $40,000. I had turned down an offer of $610,000 for that company 18 months earlier because I wasn't ready to sell. I asked my father if he was serious. He said yes. I asked my mother. She said it was only fair. I looked at my brother, who looked at the table, which told me everything I needed to know about what kind of partner he'd be. I said I needed time to think. I thought for 3 weeks. I talked to a business attorney. I talked to my accountant. I talked to my best friend, who told me to burn it all down metaphorically, and then walked back the metaphor when she saw my face. Here is what I understood at the end of those 3 weeks. My family did not see what I had built. They saw what my grandfather had left. They had collapsed 8 years of my work into the narrative of something that already existed, something that was simply passed down, something that belonged to all of us equally by virtue of blood. Nothing I had done in that building, no debt I had paid, no client I had saved, no Saturday I had sacrificed, counted in that calculation. My brother was going to get half of my life's work for $40,000, and I was going to have to watch him walk in on a Monday morning and start making decisions about something he had never touched. I made a different decision. I went back to my attorney. I told her what I was thinking. She was quiet for a while. "You know this will blow up your family," she said. "My family already blew up," I said. "I'm just cleaning the wreckage." She nodded slowly. "Okay, let's talk about how to do this carefully." What I did was not dramatic. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make accusations. I went to my father and told him I'd been doing some reflection, and that I thought the family was right. Maybe it was time to transition ownership more formally. I said I was willing to step back from day-to-day operations if they wanted to bring my brother in. I just needed a few months to prepare the business for that transition. My father was relieved. My mother cried, but the good kind. My brother said, "That's really mature of you," which I have thought about many times since. Over the next 4 months, I did the following things. I paid myself back. Legally, properly, documented in full. I had the company reimburse me for 8 years of below-market compensation. My attorney and accountant determined the fair market salary for my role and calculated the difference between that and what I'd actually been paid. The company cut me a check for $214,000. This was all disclosed to my accountant and properly reported. My father knew about it because it went through the books. He didn't ask any questions about it, which I took as quiet acknowledgement. I updated the employee contracts and put proper severance terms in place for the 2 long-term employees who'd been with me since the beginning. This was the right thing to do, and also had the effect of creating a real financial obligation that any new owner would inherit. I organized 8 years of documentation, every contract, every vendor relationship, every compliance filing, and put it all in a shared drive, not to make it easy, just to make it complete. New owners should know what they're walking into. And I resigned as registered agent and removed myself from all personal guarantees on the business's credit line and equipment leases, something I had the right to do and that my attorney advised me to do as part of any proper ownership transition. That last part took some doing. The bank had to restructure the credit line, the leasing company had to re-underwrite the equipment, my brother would need to sign on personally. His name wasn't on anything yet, so my father would have to co-sign until that was sorted. I told my father all of this in a meeting, calmly, with a printed summary my attorney had prepared. He nodded and said they'd handle it. I don't think he read the summary. I left the company in early March. My brother started in April. For the first month, he was optimistic, energetic, full of ideas. He hired a social media person. He redesigned the logo. He bought new polo shirts with the company name embroidered on them and handed them out to the crew, who were confused because they already had uniforms. By June, 2 things had happened. First, the credit line came due for renewal. The bank required my brother to sign personally, and when he did the underwriting, they looked at his financial profile and lowered the available credit by 40%. This was not a surprise to anyone who understood how business credit works. It was a significant surprise to my brother. Second, the school district contract, the largest single contract, with $112,000 annually, came up for rebid. I had always handled that renewal personally. I knew the facilities director. I knew what they wanted in the proposal. I knew the history. My brother submitted a bid. It was too high and didn't address several evaluation criteria that I'd learned mattered over 3 cycles of renewals. They went with a competitor. I heard about this from one of the employees who still texted me occasionally. I said I was sorry to hear it. I meant it. By August, my father was calling me on weekends, not to apologize, to ask questions. How did I handle this vendor? What was the procedure for that? Where was the file for the other thing? I answered every question. I was not cold about it, but I was clear that I wasn't coming back. My brother eventually stopped calling. My mother, however, did not. She called me in October and told me that the business was struggling. that my brother was overwhelmed, that the family needed me to come back and help, and that I was being selfish by refusing. She used the word selfish 3 times. I counted. I told her I loved her. I told her I hoped things improved. I told her I wasn't coming back. She cried. The bad kind this time. I don't know exactly when my brother decided to sue me. I found out in January when a process server showed up at my apartment door with paperwork. The complaint alleged that I had engaged in a fraudulent transfer of company assets, specifically the $214,000 payment to myself, and that I had sabotaged the business transition by removing myself from financial instruments, which had damaged the company's creditworthiness and caused the loss of contracts. I sat with that paperwork for a long time. Then I called my attorney. She was quiet for a moment when I read her the claims. Then she said, "Okay, good." I said, "Yeah," she said. "Yeah," she said, "because everything you did was documented, disclosed, and legal. And now we get to show that in court." What I want to tell you about is the hearing, but first I need to tell you about the 6 months between being served and walking into that courtroom. My brother's attorney sent discovery requests. We complied with all of them. Every document, every financial record, every communication, everything I had done had been run through an attorney and an accountant. There was nothing to hide, because I had made sure there was nothing to hide. My attorney deposed my brother. I wasn't in the room, but she told me afterward that it took about 45 minutes for it to become clear that he did not have a thorough understanding of the business he'd purchased. He couldn't name the 2 largest vendors. He didn't know the terms of the equipment leases. He thought the credit line was something my father had arranged, rather than something tied to 8 years of my personal credit history and business performance. My father was deposed too. I was in the room for that one. He looked older than I remembered. He answered questions carefully, truthfully. At one point my attorney asked him if he'd understood the financial disclosures I provided before the ownership transfer. He said he believed he had. She showed him the summary my attorney had prepared. He was quiet for a moment and said he hadn't reviewed it in detail. I looked at the wall. The hearing was in early July, a Tuesday. I wore a grey blazer and flat shoes. My attorney had told me to dress professionally, but not to look like I was trying too hard. I thought that was good advice for most situations. My brother was there with his attorney, a man named— I'll say he was confident and expensively dressed. My parents sat in the gallery. My mother didn't look at me when I walked in. My father looked at me once, briefly, and then looked at his hands. My brother's attorney made his opening argument. He was skilled. He framed the $214,000 as a self-dealing transaction that circumvented the family's intentions, and the removal from the credit instruments as a deliberate act designed to weaken the company before transfer. He used the word sabotage 4 times. He was going for something: wrongful asset transfer, breach of fiduciary duty. My attorney was calm. She laid out the documentation. Every step I had taken was disclosed, reported, and performed with counsel. The compensation calculation had been prepared by a CPA and reviewed by an employment attorney. The transition from the credit instruments was disclosed to my father in writing and executed by the bank and leasing company, per standard protocol. She also introduced something my brother's attorney had apparently not fully considered. When I'd restructured the compensation reimbursement, my accountant had documented, as part of that process, the full scope of what I had contributed to the business over 8 years. Not just salary, capital improvements I'd funded personally before the company could afford them. $14,000 in equipment one year, $8,500 in a vehicle repair another year, various smaller amounts. Loans I'd made to the business, documented with promissory notes that had technically never been repaid. The running total, with standard interest, came to $231,000, beyond the $214,000 I'd already recovered. My brother's attorney had not done a thorough review of the company's internal financial records. He had built his case around the $214,000 being improper. He had not accounted for the documentation showing I was owed significantly more than that. There was a recess. During the recess, my brother's attorney had a long conversation with my brother and my father in the hallway. I sat in the courtroom with my attorney and drank water. He didn't see the promissory notes, she said, quietly. I know, I said. He's going to rethink his damages calculation. I know. She looked at me. You're not nervous? I'm terrified, I said. But I'm not surprised. The case didn't go to full judgment. After the recess, my brother's attorney requested a brief adjournment to discuss settlement. The judge allowed it. My attorney and I went into a conference room. My brother's attorney came in 10 minutes later. He sat down. He was less polished than he'd been that morning. My client is open to dismissing the complaint, he said, in exchange for your client waiving any remaining claims against the business for the promissory notes. My attorney looked at me. The promissory notes totaled, with interest, approximately 231,000. I had not planned to pursue them. I had documented them carefully and had my attorney include them in discovery precisely because of this moment. Because I knew if my brother sued me, I needed something to negotiate with, not to be cruel, to be protected. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the van he drove in 1988 and the cousin who quit. I thought about the school district contract and the facilities director who'd shaken my hand every year at renewal. I thought about the Saturday morning I sat in the parking lot of a kind building at 5 a.m., waiting for a crew member who hadn't shown up so I could cover his shift myself in a company polo I'd washed the night before. I thought about my mother saying the word selfish. Tell your client, I said, that I'll waive the promissory notes. Full dismissal, mutual release, and I want it in writing by end of day. My attorney didn't blink. She'd known me long enough. My brother's attorney nodded and left. We signed the agreements that afternoon. I walked out of the building into July heat and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. My attorney shook my hand. She said, "You know you left money on the table." "I know," I said. "Was it worth it?" I thought about that. "I don't want to spend another year thinking about them," I said. "I want it to be done." She nodded. "Then it was worth it." She got in her car. I stood there a little longer. My phone showed a text from my sister, who had known nothing about the hearing. It said, "Thinking of you today. Let me know how you are." I texted back, "Good, I'll call you this weekend. My brother still runs the business. From what I understand through people I occasionally hear from, it's smaller now. The school district contract never came back. He kept 4 of the 11 employees. The social media presence is active, which I suppose is something. My father and I talk occasionally. Not about the business. Not about the lawsuit. He asks how I'm doing. I tell him. He tells me about his fishing. It's not what I wish it could be, but it's not nothing. My mother and I are still working on it. I took a position with a small consulting firm about 6 months after leaving the family business. I help companies in operational distress figure out what's wrong and how to fix it. I'm good at it for reasons that are probably obvious. I am 33 years old. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment that I like very much. I have a savings account, a used car that runs well, and a work schedule I control. I don't regret what I did. I don't mean rebuilding the business and then walking away. I mean the specific choice I made in that conference room to let it go, to waive what I was owed, to sign the paper and walk out into the heat and be done. People ask me sometimes, when they hear pieces of this story, whether I won. I never know quite how to answer that. I didn't get a trophy. My family didn't apologize. The business that took 8 years of my life still has my grandfather's name on it, and I'm not part of it. But I sat in that conference room and my brother's attorney came to me. He came to me with an offer, not a demand. He came to me because the case they built had a hole in it that I'd quietly prepared for years in advance, not out of vengeance, out of documentation, out of the same careful, thorough, unglamorous habit that built the business in the first place. My grandfather always said the thing about a clean shop is that when something goes wrong, you can find it fast. I kept a clean shop. That morning in the hallway before the recess, I had looked at my brother walking out with his attorney. He looked confident. He looked like a man who believed he was winning. I had thought, "I hope this ends well for you." I genuinely had. Not because I didn't feel the hurt of what had happened. I did, I still do. But because he is my brother, and I remember being small with him, and some part of me has never stopped being the older sister who wanted things to be okay. They're not okay yet. Maybe they will be someday. But I am okay. That turned out to matter more than I expected. And whatever my brother walked out of that building, believing on a Tuesday in July that he had settled, that he had handled it, that it was over, I walked out knowing something different. I had built something. I had protected it. I had survived having it taken, and then survived being sued for taking care of myself, and I had come out the other side with clean hands and a signed agreement and nowhere to be until Monday. The sun was very bright that afternoon. I put on my sunglasses and went to get lunch. I've had a lot of time to think about what the word fair actually means. My family used it constantly during those months. It wasn't fair that I had more ownership stake than my brother. It wasn't fair that I'd been running things alone. It wasn't fair, my mother said this one quietly at the kitchen table, that I'd been so difficult about all of it. What I noticed is that nobody once defined what fair meant. They just knew that the current arrangement didn't feel like it. And when something doesn't feel fair to people who love each other, the easiest fix is to make the person who has more give some of it away. That's not fairness, that's just redistribution of comfort. Here is what I actually believe, having lived through this. Fairness isn't about equal shares. It's about equal accountability. My brother wanted half the business but none of the years that built it. He wanted the outcome without the history. And when the history caught up with him, the credit line, the contract renewal, the 11 employees who knew my name and not his, he didn't ask himself what he was missing. He hired an attorney and called it sabotage. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for about a year. Now I just say it like a fact, the way you'd describe weather. What I keep coming back to is documentation, not as a legal strategy, though it became one, just as a habit. I documented things because I was the only one who knew them, and I understood that knowledge disappears when people do. I kept records because it was the responsible thing, the careful thing, the thing my grandfather would have recognized as good practice. And then one day those records became the difference between losing everything I built and walking out of a conference room with a signed release and clean hands. That's not luck. That's what happens when you do the unglamorous work consistently over time. The care you put into something ordinary accumulates. It doesn't always pay off in obvious ways. Sometimes it just keeps you protected when someone decides to test you. I think about my brother sometimes, not with the kind of anger I used to carry, but with something closer to sadness. He is a capable person who was handed a narrative, that the business was a family asset, that he deserved a share, that I was the obstacle, and he never stopped to interrogate it. That's not a character flaw unique to him. Most people take the story they're given and run with it. It takes something specific to stop and ask, but is that actually true? What do I actually know here? My grandfather built that company one contract at a time, one van, one early morning, one difficult client he showed up for anyway. He didn't think of it as legacy building. He was just doing the work that was in front of him. I tried to do the same thing. I tried to do it even after they stopped seeing it, and when I walked out of that building in July and the sun hit me, and I had nowhere to be until Monday, I understood something I hadn't quite been able to say before. The work was never really about them. It was about what I could do, what I could build, what I could build, what I could protect when tested. That belongs to me. It always did. No lawsuit can touch it.